One lonely night, an Apache woman entered his life without looking back. James lived in a small town that most people would call quiet, but to him, it often felt empty. The streets were familiar, the faces even more so, yet there was a distance that he could never seem to bridge. He walked past the same shops, the same houses, and waved at the same neighbors every day, but none of it ever felt real to him anymore. Life had become a series of routines like clockwork. Wake up, go to work at the factory, return home, eat dinner alone, and then sit in silence until it was time to sleep. It wasn't a bad life, but it wasn't a life that filled him with joy either. James' apartment was small, just enough for him and his few belongings. The walls were bare, except for a faded photograph of his parents that he had kept from his childhood. Sometimes he would stare at that photograph and remember the laughter and warmth of his home when he was young. But those memories only made the present feel colder. He missed having someone to talk to, someone to share the small moments with, but over the years, his loneliness had become a companion he had learned to live with. Evenings were the hardest for James. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the town would grow quiet, and the streets would empty. He would sit by the window, watching the lights flicker in the distance, and wonder about the lives of the people around him. Families would gather in their homes, children laughing in the yards, neighbors chatting on porches. He would see couples walking hand in hand, smiling at each other, and a pang of longing would stir in his chest. He didn't hate these moments. He actually cherished them in a strange way, but they reminded him that he was on the outside, observing life rather than living it. James had tried, many times, to break out of his solitude. He had dated a few women in the past, but none of those relationships had lasted. They all ended with polite words and forced smiles, leaving him feeling more disconnected than before. Over time, he stopped trying as hard, telling himself that it was better to be alone than to feel that emptiness again. His friends, though well-meaning, often didn't understand. They had their own lives, their own families, and they didn't see how heavy the quiet could feel when it settled in your chest every night. Work was no different. James was diligent and responsible, respected by his coworkers, but never truly known by them. Conversations were mostly about the weather, the latest news, or mundane factory matters. He listened, nodded, and occasionally spoke, but his words never carried weight. At the end of the day, he would leave the factory with a sense of relief, not because the work was tiring, but because it meant he could return to the safe confines of his solitude. That particular evening felt different, though James didn't realize it at the time. The air was colder than usual, crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of the approaching winter. He wrapped his coat tighter around him as he walked, his footsteps echoing along the empty streets. There was a stillness in the world that made him feel both peaceful and restless at the same time. He had no destination in mind. He was simply walking, letting the night guide him as his thoughts drifted aimlessly. As he passed the small park near the edge of town, he noticed the flicker of a streetlight reflecting off the frost-covered grass. The park was empty, as it always was at night, and the swing swayed gently in the cold breeze. James paused for a moment, watching the movement. There was something about the loneliness of the park, the quiet rhythm of the night, that mirrored his own life. He felt a strange comfort in it, a sense of understanding that perhaps the world itself shared his solitude. He continued walking, passing the familiar corner diner where the neon sign buzzed faintly. Usually, he would stop for a cup of coffee or a slice of pie, but tonight, he didn't. Something in the air had changed, a feeling he couldn't quite place. It was subtle, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. James felt a tingle of anticipation, though he didn't know why. Nights like these were rare, where the usual monotony of his life seemed to crack just enough for something unexpected to slip through. James often thought about his childhood during moments like this. He remembered the wide-open fields, the sound of the river flowing nearby, the laughter of his friends as they ran and played under the sun. Those memories felt like a different life, one that belonged to someone else. The town had changed since then, and so had he. But the longing for connection, for a life that felt alive, remained. It was a quiet ache, one that he carried without complaint, simply because he had no other choice. As he turned the corner onto a narrow street, he caught sight of a figure in the distance. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the street lamps. But as he drew closer, he realized it was a woman, standing alone at the edge of the street. She was wrapped in a shawl, the colors muted but warm, and she seemed completely at ease in the quiet night. James felt an unfamiliar curiosity stir within him. There was something about her presence that made him stop in his tracks, something that made the cold air feel warmer, the empty streets feel less lonely. He wanted to look away, to continue on his usual path, but he couldn't. There was a pull, subtle but undeniable, that drew him closer. The woman's eyes met his for a brief moment, and in them, he saw a depth of understanding he hadn't seen in anyone else for years. She didn't speak, yet her presence spoke volumes. It was as if she recognized his loneliness without needing to ask, as if she had been waiting for him to notice her all along. James hesitated, unsure of what to do next. In the past, he might have walked away, afraid of the unknown, but tonight felt different. There was no fear, only a quiet acceptance, a willingness to let the moment unfold naturally. He took a cautious step forward, and the woman nodded slightly, acknowledging him without words. The simplicity of the gesture struck him deeply. It was a small connection, but in that instant, it carried more meaning than he had felt in years. He continued walking beside her, not knowing if they would speak or remain in silence. The world around them seemed to shrink, the town fading into the background as they shared the quiet night. James felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't a grand revelation, nor was it a dramatic change, but it was enough to stir something within him. He realized that perhaps life still held surprises, that even in the loneliest nights, there was a chance for connection, for a new beginning. For the first time in a long while, James didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. And in that small, fleeting moment, the emptiness he had carried for so many years seemed a little lighter. He didn't know who the woman was, where she had come from, or how long she would remain. But for now, it didn't matter. The night had changed, and with it, James felt a shift within himself, a quiet awakening that whispered of possibilities yet to come. As they walked together under the dim streetlights, James felt a sense of anticipation mixed with calm. The streets, the houses, the familiar sights, they were still there, but something had changed. Life felt a little wider, a little deeper, a little more alive. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that tonight, his life had taken a step toward something new, something meaningful. And in that small, quiet way, the lonely night had begun to lose its weight, replaced by the possibility of connection and the hope of a story yet to unfold. The night air was crisp and still, and James continued to walk beside the mysterious woman he had noticed earlier. She moved with a quiet confidence, her steps steady and deliberate, as if she belonged to the night itself. The streetlights cast long, soft shadows on the pavement, and the faint hum of the town in the distance seemed distant, almost unreal. For James, this was unlike anything he had experienced before. Normally, he would have avoided strangers, or at least kept his distance. But something about her presence felt comforting, familiar in a way he could not explain. The woman finally spoke, her voice low and soft, carrying a musical quality that made the words linger in the cool night air. "It's a quiet town," she said simply. Her accent was unique, melodic, and James realized that she was not from here, not from anywhere he knew. There was a strength in her voice, a calmness that seemed to steady the chaos of his own thoughts. James nodded, unsure how to respond, but eager to continue listening. "My name is Ayana," she said after a pause. There was a weight in her name, a story hidden behind it. James introduced himself, and for a moment they walked in silence again. There was no rush, no need for forced conversation. The silence was comfortable, filled not with emptiness but with the possibility of connection. James noticed details about her that made him curious. The way her eyes reflected the faint light, the gentle way she adjusted the shawl around her shoulders, the sense that she had seen much in her life yet remained unshaken. As they walked, James realized that he was asking questions without realizing it. He asked where she had come from, what brought her to this town, what she did when she traveled. Iana answered each question thoughtfully, never revealing too much, yet never hiding entirely. She spoke of long journeys, of open landscapes, of the wind on her face and the sound of rivers she had crossed. James listened intently, fascinated by her stories, imagining the world she had seen, so vast, so different from the quiet streets he had always known. There was a sense of mystery about her that drew him in, but it was more than that. It was the honesty in her words, the absence of pretense. She did not try to impress or flatter. She simply existed, fully present in the night, and it was impossible not to be captivated. James felt a warmth growing inside him, a feeling he had long forgotten, the thrill of truly meeting someone new, someone whose presence changes the rhythm of your world. At one point, they reached the small park that James had passed earlier. The swing swayed gently in the cold wind, and the trees whispered softly under the moonlight. Iana stopped near the edge of the park and looked around as if taking it all in. "Places have stories," she said quietly. "Even when they are empty, they carry the memory of people who were here before." James nodded slowly. He understood that she meant more than the park itself. She meant the town, the streets, and perhaps even him. Her words struck a chord within him, awakening thoughts he had tried to bury. That even in solitude, life carries meaning, and every place, every moment, is part of a larger story. James found himself opening up to her in ways he had not done with anyone in years. He spoke of his childhood, of the quiet streets he had grown up in, of the friends he had lost touch with, of the loneliness that had followed him into adulthood. He did not expect her to understand fully, but she listened with patience and attention, never interrupting or judging. There was a rare quality in her presence, a sense of acceptance that made James feel safe enough to reveal his vulnerabilities. Iana smiled softly. "I understand," she said. "Life can feel heavy when we carry it alone, but sometimes meeting someone, even briefly, can change the way we see the world." Her words were simple, yet profound. James felt a surge of emotion he could not name. It was hope, curiosity, and relief all at once. For the first time in years, he did not feel the weight of the night pressing down on him. Instead, it felt lighter, almost bearable because he was no longer alone in it. They continued walking through the quiet streets, sharing small stories and observations. Iana spoke of the places she had traveled, of the mountains she had climbed, the rivers she had crossed, the towns she had visited. Each story painted vivid pictures in James' mind, transporting him beyond the boundaries of his ordinary life. He felt a sense of awe and admiration for her courage and resilience. At the same time, he realized that her life had not been easy. There was a subtle sadness in her voice, a reminder of the challenges she had faced along the way. Despite the sadness, there was also strength and determination. Iana had learned to navigate the world on her own terms, to face hardships without losing herself. James found himself drawn to that strength, inspired by it. He realized that he had been living cautiously, hiding from the uncertainties of life, while she had embraced them fully. It made him reflect on his own choices, his own fears, and the ways he had limited himself. As the night grew colder, they stopped by a small cafe that was still open, its warm light spilling onto the street. Iana suggested they go inside for a moment, just to warm up. James agreed and they entered together. The smell of coffee and baked goods filled the air, and the quiet chatter of the few late-night customers created a comforting background. They sat at a corner table, and for the first time, they shared more personal stories. Yana spoke of leaving her home, of the family she had left behind, of the journey that had brought her here. Each detail was shared with careful honesty, revealing her independence and resilience. James listened, captivated by her words. He realized that she carried a past full of courage and choices, a life lived fully and on her own terms. Yet there was also vulnerability, moments of doubt and longing that she had kept hidden from the world. He felt privileged to hear these pieces of her story, to be trusted in ways he had never been trusted before. It created a bond, quiet but undeniable, between them, a bond that was fragile yet strong, delicate yet enduring. Time passed without notice. Hours felt like minutes as they spoke, laughed softly, and simply existed together in the warmth of the cafe. For James, the world outside, the loneliness, the quiet streets, the cold air, seemed distant and irrelevant. Here in this small space, a connection had begun to form, subtle yet powerful. He realized that meeting Ayana had changed the rhythm of his night, his thoughts, his very being. She had entered his life without warning, without expectation, and yet it felt as if she had always been meant to be here. When they finally left the cafe, the streets were even quieter than before. Snow had begun to fall lightly, dusting the rooftops and sidewalks with a delicate white layer. James and Ayana walked together, their footsteps leaving temporary marks in the snow. The night felt magical, suspended in a way that made ordinary concerns fade. James realized that he was no longer thinking about the loneliness that had consumed him for so long. Instead, he was fully present, aware of every sound, every movement, every heartbeat. Before parting ways for the night, Ayana turned to him and smiled. "I will see you again," she said, not as a question but as a statement. There was certainty in her voice, a quiet promise that gave James a sense of peace. He nodded, unable to speak at first, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. He realized that this encounter, brief though it might have seemed, had planted a seed of change in his life, a hope that he had thought was lost forever. As he watched her disappear into the darkness, James felt a mixture of emotions: wonder, curiosity, hope, and even a touch of fear. He did not know where this would lead or how long she would remain in his life. But he knew one thing with certainty. He had been awakened from a long sleep of solitude, and something new had begun. The night, once lonely and cold, now carried a sense of possibility, a quiet promise that life could be different, brighter, and more meaningful than he had ever imagined. Walking back to his apartment, James replayed the night in his mind. Every detail of Ayana's presence, her voice, her stories, and the way she had moved through the streets stayed with him. He felt alive in a way he hadn't felt for years. For the first time in a long while, he believed that connection, understanding, and perhaps even love were not distant dreams, but things that could enter his life, unannounced and without warning. By the time he reached his apartment, the snow had thickened slightly, covering the ground in a soft, white blanket. James stood for a moment at his door, looking out at the silent streets, and smiled. Tonight had been unlike any night before, and he knew that his life was about to change in ways he could not yet predict. He felt ready for the first time in years to welcome the unexpected, to embrace the unknown, and to open his heart to someone who had entered his life quietly, without looking back, but leaving an imprint he would never forget. The days that followed were different for James. The memory of that quiet night, walking beside Ayana, lingered in his mind like a gentle echo. Each morning, he woke with a sense of anticipation he had not felt in years. The streets, the familiar faces, the same routines, all of it seemed sharper, more vibrant, as if the world itself had taken on new colors. He would catch himself smiling at the smallest things: a bird perched on a fence, the the sunlight glinting off the windows, even the rhythmic hum of his factory work. Yana's presence, though absent, had planted a seed of light in his life, a sense that something meaningful could emerge from the ordinary. It was not long before their paths crossed again. One evening, James was walking along the same streets, watching the sun dip below the horizon, when he spotted her near the edge of town. She was leaning against a tree, the shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes tracing the outline of the distant hills. When she noticed him, her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. There was no hesitation this time, no uncertainty. She had arrived intentionally, and that simple fact filled James with a quiet joy. "Good evening, James," she said softly, her voice carrying over the chill in the air. "Good evening, Yana," he replied, feeling a warmth spread through him at the sound of her name. It had become familiar already, almost like part of the rhythm of his life. They walked together, as they had on the first night, but now there was a comfort in the silence between them. Words were no longer necessary at every moment. They could simply be present with each other. The quiet streets and the soft glow of the streetlights seemed to shrink around them, creating a small world just for the two of them. James realized how rare this feeling was, this sense of being truly understood without explanation or pretense. As they walked, Yana began to share more about her life. She spoke of the people she had met during her travels, the lessons she had learned, and the challenges she had faced along the way. Her voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability beneath it, a reminder that even the strongest people carry unseen burdens. She told James about her family, the home she had left behind, and the reasons she had chosen to keep moving rather than settling. Each story revealed her independence and courage, but also the moments when she had longed for stability, for someone to walk beside her. James listened with rapt attention. He found himself admiring her resilience, the way she had faced life's uncertainties with grace and strength. At the same time, he felt a growing empathy for her struggles. He realized that Yana, despite her confidence, had experienced loneliness and doubt much like his own. It was a strange and comforting thought, that two people from such different worlds could share similar feelings, yet approach them in different ways. In return, James began to open up more about himself. He spoke of his childhood, the quiet town he had grown up in, and the sense of isolation he had felt even among friends and family. He talked about the jobs he had tried and the relationships that had ended too soon, leaving him with questions he could not answer. With each word, he felt the weight of his past lift slightly, replaced by a sense of connection he had not known he needed. Ayana never judged him or offered solutions. She simply listened. Her presence was steady, like a calm river flowing beside him, and it gave him the courage to share more than he had with anyone in years. He realized that their bond was not built on grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but on these small, shared moments of honesty and understanding. Each conversation, each glance, each quiet smile strengthened the connection between them. One evening, as they walked near the river that ran along the outskirts of town, Ayana stopped and pointed to the water reflecting the fading light of the sunset. "Rivers are like life," she said softly. "They keep moving, even when the path is unclear. Sometimes they are calm, sometimes rough, but they always find a way forward." James thought about her words. He had spent much of his life waiting for things to change, unsure of how to move forward himself. But Ayana's perspective was simple and clear. Life continues, and so must we. He felt a sense of clarity he had never experienced before, a quiet motivation to face his own uncertainties with courage. As the weeks passed, their connection deepened. They began to spend more time together, sharing quiet walks, small meals, and long conversations under the night sky. Ayana taught James to notice the beauty in ordinary moments, the way the wind rustled the leaves, the patterns in the clouds, the sound of birds at dawn. He, in turn, shared his favorite spots in town, the hidden corners he had discovered over the years, and the small joys that had kept him going through lonely days. Through these shared experiences, James began to see the world differently. He noticed the warmth in people's smiles, the kindness in small gestures, and the simple pleasures that had previously gone unnoticed. Life felt fuller, richer, and more meaningful. He realized that Ayanna had not only entered his life, but she had also opened his eyes to parts of himself he had forgotten existed, the part that could hope, trust, and feel deeply once again. But their growing bond was not without challenges. James found himself questioning the pace of their relationship, wondering if he was moving too fast or if he was ready to let someone in so completely. Ayanna, too, carried her own fears. She had lived independently for so long that the idea of staying in one place, of relying on someone else, was both comforting and intimidating. Yet despite these uncertainties, they continued to meet, driven by the quiet pull of their connection and the sense that they were meant to understand each other. One particularly cold evening, they sat together on a bench overlooking the town, the lights reflecting in the river below. The silence between them was not awkward. It was filled with the weight of unspoken emotions, the kind that only develops between people who truly see each other. James took a deep breath and spoke, his voice gentle. "I feel like I've known you longer than just a few nights." "It's strange, but it feels real." Ayanna looked at him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights. "Sometimes when we meet someone who understands us, time feels different. Moments stretch, and we feel connected in ways we cannot explain." "That's how I feel with you, James." Her words resonated deeply within him. He realized that the connection they shared was not based on circumstance or convenience, but on mutual understanding, respect, and the willingness to be vulnerable. It was rare, fragile, and beautiful, all at once. As the night grew colder, they walked back through the quiet streets, their steps leaving marks in the thin layer of frost that had begun to settle. James felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. For the first time, he understood that connection was not about controlling or possessing someone. It was about being present, listening, and sharing life honestly, moment by moment. In the following days, their bond continued to grow. They began to learn more about each other's habits, likes, and dreams. Ayanna spoke of places she longed to visit, of traditions she cherished, and of the freedom she valued deeply. James shared his hopes for a future where loneliness was replaced with companionship, where life could be richer because it was shared with someone who truly understood him. Through these conversations, they discovered that despite their differences, they complemented each other in unexpected ways. Ayanna's adventurous spirit and independent nature encouraged James to take risks, to step out of his comfort zone, and to embrace life more fully. James' steadiness and patience provided Ayanna with a sense of stability she had not experienced in years, a safe space where she could rest without fear. Their friendship began to feel like a delicate balance, a dance of understanding and trust. Each moment together strengthened the invisible thread that connected them, weaving a tapestry of shared experiences, laughter, and quiet contemplation. James realized that he was falling, not in a way he had expected, not with the rush of infatuation, but with the slow, steady certainty that comes from knowing someone is meant to be in your life. One evening, as they watched the stars appear in the night sky, Ayanna spoke softly. "Life is full of choices, James. We can stay in our routines, live quietly, and never take a chance. Or we can open ourselves to the unknown, to connection, and to change. That's the risk I've always taken, and it's what brought me here." James nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He knew that meeting Ayanna had already changed him, had already shown him a path he had never imagined. He felt gratitude for her presence, for her courage, and for the quiet way she had entered his life without fanfare, without demand, and yet left an imprint that would last forever. As they parted that night, James felt a sense of anticipation for the nights to come. He knew that their journey together was just beginning, and that the bond they were forming would face challenges and questions in the future. But for now, he embraced the quiet joy of connection, the warmth of understanding, and the simple happiness of being with someone who saw him as he truly was. In those moments, James realized that life had taken a turn he could not have predicted. The loneliness that had once defined him was giving way to hope, trust, and a sense of belonging. And though the road ahead was uncertain, he knew that with Ayanna by his side, even for just these fleeting nights, his life would never be the same again. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between James and Ayanna grew stronger, yet the warmth of their connection was accompanied by questions and challenges that neither had anticipated. Life, they soon realized, was not a straight path but a winding journey, filled with moments of joy and uncertainty. James had opened his heart in ways he had not thought possible, and Ayanna had allowed herself to feel something resembling home for the first time in years. But the outside world, their past experiences, and their own fears began to quietly test the strength of the connection they had built. James noticed the first signs of tension one afternoon when Ayanna seemed distant during their walk along the river. She had been quieter than usual, her eyes tracing the rippling water without really seeing it. James hesitated before speaking, afraid of intruding yet compelled by concern. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Ayanna paused and looked at him, a faint shadow crossing her expression. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice lacked the warmth he had grown used to. There was a hesitation, a subtle barrier that hadn't been there before. James knew her well enough to sense that something was troubling her, even if she was unwilling to say it out loud. They continued walking in silence for a while. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and the distant smoke from chimneys. James wanted to reach out to ask what was wrong, but he also respected her space. Over time, he had learned that patience was sometimes more powerful than words. Eventually, Ayanna spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I worry," she admitted quietly. "About staying in one place, about becoming too attached, about losing myself. I've always moved, James. I've always relied on my own strength. Staying close to someone, it's unfamiliar and it frightens me." James listened carefully, understanding the courage it took for her to voice these fears. "I understand," he replied gently. "I know your life has been about freedom and independence. I don't want to take that from you. I only want to be someone you can trust, someone who walks beside you, not someone who holds you back." Ayanna nodded, a flicker of relief passing over her face. "It's not easy," she said. "I've always lived with the wind as my companion. I've never relied on anyone fully, not even my own family. Letting someone in, it feels dangerous." James took her hand, a gesture of quiet reassurance. "It doesn't have to be dangerous. We can take it slowly, day by day. You don't have to give up your freedom to be with me. We can find a balance together." Her grip on his hand tightened slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the trust she was beginning to place in him. It was a small but significant step, one that spoke volumes more than any words could convey. James realized that love or connection was not just about passion or excitement. It was also about patience, understanding, and the willingness to navigate fears together. Despite their efforts, the outside world began to present challenges as well. Friends and neighbors started noticing Ayanna's presence in James' life and offered opinions, often well-meaning but intrusive. "Who is she?" they would ask, or "Do you know anything about her past?" Their curiosity, though harmless in intention, created tension for James. He felt protective of Ayanna and worried that too much attention could make her uncomfortable. Ayanna, for her part, was not used to scrutiny, and the whispers of the town reminded her of why she had chosen to keep moving in the first place. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, James found himself sitting alone, thinking about how fragile their situation could be. He loved Ayanna, and he wanted her in his life, but he also wanted to respect her independence. Balancing these feelings was not simple. He reflected on their moments together, the quiet walks, the shared stories, the small gestures of trust, and realized that the bond they shared was worth every challenge. But he also knew that they would need to confront their fears if this connection was to endure. Ayanna, too, wrestled with her emotions. She valued the freedom she had always known, the ability to leave and start anew whenever she wished. Yet she also felt a deep connection with James, a sense of belonging that she had not felt in years. The tension between her desire for independence and her growing attachment to James created an inner conflict she could not easily resolve. Some nights she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, questioning whether staying meant losing a part of herself or gaining something she had longed for without realizing it. The turning point came one evening when James invited Ayanna to his small apartment. He wanted to show her the world he lived in, to share the quiet spaces that had defined his life. As they sat together in the dimly lit living room, surrounded by familiar objects and simple comforts, Ayanna's hesitation surfaced again. "This is different from what I know," she said softly, glancing around. "It feels safe but also permanent." James smiled gently. "It doesn't have to feel permanent, it's just a place to share with someone you trust. We can leave if it feels too much." "I only want you to feel comfortable." Ayanna considered his words, then nodded. "I want to try," she said. "I don't want to run away from this connection, even if it scares me." That night they talked for hours. They shared fears, dreams, regrets, and moments of joy. James spoke about his loneliness, his struggles to connect with people, and the hope he now felt because of her. Ayanna shared stories of her travels, the lessons she had learned from life on the road, and her longing for a sense of belonging without losing herself. Through these conversations, they began to understand each other on a deeper level, discovering that love was not about possession, but about mutual respect and trust. Yet challenges continued. Ayanna's past occasionally resurfaced in unexpected ways: a phone call from a distant relative, a letter from a friend she had left behind. Each reminder of the life she had once known brought uncertainty and doubt. James, aware of her struggle, offered patience and support, never pressuring her to make decisions before she was ready. He understood that love required space as much as closeness, and he was determined to give her both. At the same time, James faced his own doubts. He worried about whether he could meet Ayanna's needs, whether he could respect her independence while maintaining a connection. He questioned if he was strong enough to support someone who had lived so freely and bravely. Yet every time he saw her, heard her laugh, or witnessed her quiet strength, he found reassurance. The bond they shared, though tested by fears and external pressures, had a foundation built on honesty, understanding, and care. One particularly cold night, they walked together along the river, the moonlight reflecting on the water's surface. Snowflakes drifted softly around them, and the quiet of the night amplified the closeness between them. Ayanna stopped and looked at James, her eyes filled with a mixture of vulnerability and determination. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, "but I do know that I want to face it with you if you'll have me." James took her hands in his, feeling the warmth despite the chill in the air. "I will," he said simply. "No matter what comes, we face it together. We'll navigate the fears, the uncertainties, and the challenges. I don't want perfection. I just want honesty, trust, and the chance to be with you." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, a reflection of the emotions she had carried silently for so long. "Then I will stay," she whispered. "Not because I am certain, but because I trust you, and because I want to see where this path leads." That night marked a turning point. They realized that love and connection were not about avoiding challenges or eliminating fears. They were about facing uncertainties together, supporting one another through doubts, and choosing to trust despite the risks. James understood that Ayana's independence was not a barrier, but a gift, a reminder that true connection allowed for freedom, not confinement. Ayana realized that letting someone in did not mean losing herself, but discovering a companion who would walk beside her while respecting her spirit. In the weeks that followed, they grew more comfortable navigating their relationship. They learned to communicate openly, to express fears without judgment, and to celebrate the small victories of trust and understanding. Friends and neighbors continued to notice their bond, but their attention no longer felt intrusive. James and Ayana had developed a quiet resilience, a shared understanding that allowed them to face external pressures without letting them disrupt the foundation they had built. Through it all, they discovered the beauty of balance. Ayana could maintain her independence, continue her travels when she wished, and explore the world on her own terms. James, in turn, could offer stability, understanding, and a consistent presence without demanding control. Their relationship became a dance of trust, patience, and mutual respect, where each step was taken with care, awareness, and love. By the end of this period, James and Ayana had faced their fears, confronted external challenges, and deepened their bond. They realized that connection required courage, vulnerability, and compromise, but the rewards were immeasurable. The loneliness that had once defined James' life was replaced by companionship, understanding, and a quiet hope for the future. Ayana, too, discovered that opening her heart did not diminish her spirit. It enriched it, adding warmth, trust, and shared joy to her independent life. The first light of dawn spilled over the town, casting a soft golden glow across the streets. James awoke to a sense of calm and anticipation, a feeling that had become familiar since Ayana had entered his life. The loneliness that had once shadowed his days seemed distant now, replaced by a quiet hope that had grown steadily over the weeks. He stretched, listening to the soft hum of morning activity outside his window, and thought about the journey that had brought them both to this point. Ayana was already awake, sitting by the window in his small apartment, wrapped in her shawl, her gaze fixed on the horizon. James watched her for a moment, noting the way the morning light illuminated her features, highlighting the strength and gentleness that had drawn him to her from the start. He felt a swell of gratitude, not just for her presence, but for the courage she had shown in letting herself trust, in allowing herself to be part of his life. They greeted each other with quiet smiles, the kind that needed no words. Over breakfast, they spoke of small things, the plans for the day, the errands to run, and the way the town seemed different under the soft light of morning. Even in these ordinary moments, there was a sense of connection that was extraordinary. James realized that the foundation of their relationship was not built on grand gestures, but on the consistent presence of trust, understanding, and shared experiences. After breakfast, they decided to walk through the streets of the town, enjoying the crisp air and the quiet beauty of early morning. The sidewalks were empty, and the shops were just beginning to open. The world felt fresh, like a blank page, ready to be filled with new memories. James held Ayana's hand gently, and she responded with a light squeeze, a silent affirmation of the bond they shared. Each step they took together was a small declaration of their commitment to face life side by side. As they walked, they reminisced about the first nights they had spent together, the quiet walks, the conversations by the river, the soft moments in the cafe. They laughed at the awkward beginnings, the hesitations, and the small misunderstandings that had seemed so significant at the time. Looking back, those moments were not obstacles but building blocks, shaping the relationship that had grown between them. James realized that every step, every challenge, and every shared story had brought them closer, creating a connection that was steady, resilient, and deeply meaningful. Their walk led them to the park near the edge of town, where the swings swayed gently in the morning breeze. Ayana paused, taking in the sight, and James noticed a hint of nostalgia in her eyes. "This place feels different now," she said softly. "It used to feel empty, quiet, but today it feels full, as if it holds all the memories we've made together." James smiled, understanding exactly what she meant. The town that had once seemed small and lonely now felt alive, filled with moments of connection and shared experiences. Even the streets that had echoed with his solitary footsteps now carried the warmth of companionship. He realized that life was not defined by the places themselves, but by the people we share them with, and by the love, understanding, and trust that transform ordinary moments into something extraordinary. Over the next few days, James and Ayanna continued to explore the town and its surroundings together. They visited the river, where the water shimmered under the sunlight, and the small hills that offered a panoramic view of the landscape. They discovered hidden paths, quiet corners, and places where they could sit in silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. With every shared experience, their bond grew stronger, more confident, and more enduring. One evening, as they watched the sun set behind the hills, Ayanna spoke with a quiet certainty. "I never imagined staying in one place could feel like this," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I thought I would always move, always leave, because that was the life I knew. But now I see that staying doesn't mean losing myself. It means choosing someone to share life with, and that choice doesn't take away freedom, it enriches it." James felt a surge of emotion at her words. He had hoped for this, dreamed of this, but hearing it directly from her made the moment profoundly real. "I feel the same," he said gently. "Being with you doesn't feel like losing myself either. It feels like finding a part of life I didn't know was missing. With you, everything feels fuller, richer, and more meaningful." Their relationship had reached a point where trust and understanding were unwavering. They had faced challenges together, confronted fears, and navigated the uncertainties of life with patience and care. Each obstacle they had overcome had strengthened their bond, creating a partnership rooted in respect, honesty, and love. James realized that he no longer feared the unknown, because he knew they would face it together. As winter approached, the town was blanketed in a soft layer of snow. The world outside seemed quiet and serene, mirroring the calm that had settled in their hearts. They spent their days exploring the snow-covered streets, making footprints in the fresh snow, and laughing as they discovered the simple joys of the season. The cold air could not touch the warmth that had grown between them, the warmth of companionship, understanding, and shared hope. One afternoon, they visited a small cabin on the outskirts of town, a place where they could escape from the world and simply be together. They lit a fire, its warmth filling the room, and shared stories of the past, hopes for the future, and dreams that had been nurtured silently in their hearts. James realized that this was not just a temporary feeling of happiness. It was a deep, abiding sense of fulfillment that came from knowing someone cared for him completely, and that he could do the same for them. Ayanna looked around the cabin, a gentle smile on her face. "This feels like a beginning," she said softly. "Not just of us, but of everything we can create together. A life built not on fear or solitude, but on trust, respect, and shared joy." James nodded, feeling the truth in her words. "Yes," he said. "It's a life we choose together, a life where we face challenges, celebrate joys, and support each other through everything. I've waited so long for something like this, and now it feels real, more real than I ever imagined possible." As the seasons changed, their relationship continued to flourish. They celebrated small milestones like the first snowfall, the blooming of spring flowers, and quiet nights under the stars. Each day brought new opportunities for connection, for understanding, and for growth. James realized that life was no longer a series of lonely routines, but a tapestry woven with moments of joy, shared experiences, and the comfort of knowing that someone was always there for him. Ayanna, too, discovered a new sense of freedom within connection. She realized that being with James did not confine her, but allowed her to explore life with a companion who respected her spirit and encouraged her growth. Her past journeys had been full of lessons, but this new chapter felt different. It was a life chosen together, a life rich with trust, love, and shared purpose. One evening, as they walked along the riverbank under a sky full of stars, Ayanna stopped and turned to James. "I used to think that independence meant solitude," she said softly, "but I see now that independence and connection can coexist. We can have both, and in that balance, life becomes beautiful." James took her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch and the depth of her words. "Yes," he replied, "we've built something rare and precious. It's not perfect and life will still bring challenges, but we face them together, and that makes all the difference." Their journey had not been easy. They had faced fears, doubts, and the uncertainty of two lives intersecting in unexpected ways. But through patience, trust, and unwavering care, they had created a bond that was strong and enduring. James realized that love was not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about the quiet moments, the shared experiences, and the commitment to be present for one another. Ayanna smiled, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "I never imagined finding someone who sees me, truly sees me," she said. "And yet here you are. And I see you too in ways I didn't think were possible. This is more than I ever hoped for." James felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a quiet joy that filled his heart completely. "We've both found something we didn't know we were looking for," he said softly. "A connection that makes life brighter, fuller, and more meaningful. And I will cherish it every day with all that I have." As the night grew deeper, they sat together by the river, their hands entwined, watching the reflection of stars dance on the water's surface. The world around them was quiet, peaceful, and filled with the gentle rhythm of life. James realized that the loneliness that had once defined him was gone, replaced by hope, trust, and a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. Ayanna, too, felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that she had found a place where her spirit could remain free while her heart could be fully present. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, their lives continued to intertwine in meaningful ways. They supported each other through challenges, celebrated each other's successes, and discovered the beauty of a life lived together. The town, once a backdrop to James' solitude, became a canvas for their shared experiences, each street and corner holding memories of laughter, quiet conversation, and small acts of care. Through it all, they understood that true connection required patience, trust, and the courage to face uncertainty together. They learned that love was not a destination, but a journey, a continuous choice to walk beside one another, to nurture and to grow. And in this journey, they found a life that was richer, fuller, and more meaningful than either had ever imagined. James and Ayanna had entered a new chapter of life, one where loneliness was replaced by companionship, fear by trust, and uncertainty by hope. Together, they had created a life that honored both their independence and their bond, proving that true connection does not diminish freedom but enhances it. And as they looked toward the future, hand in hand, they knew that whatever challenges awaited, they would face them together, with courage, love, and unwavering trust in each other. In that quiet town, under the vast sky and the endless stars, their story had found its rhythm, a story of connection, transformation, and the enduring power of two hearts choosing to walk the path of life side by side.